What would happen if the entire fashion industry discovered that the black woman they cruelly mocked and laughed off the runway was actually the secret genius behind every masterpiece they had been worshipping? What if she was the mind behind every headline-grabbing silhouette, every whispered about design, every so-called genius collection they'd worshipped all season long? This story is an exploration of how industries can systematically exclude and erase black creators, especially in America. If you love interesting stories like this that expose the truth, please give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments section where in the world you are watching this video, and also do well to smash that subscribe button. The music thundered through the Miami Convention Center like a war drum. Bass lines pounded against marble walls. Lights blazed like lightning strikes across a midnight sky. Cameras clicked like rattlesnakes ready to strike, their flashes creating a strobe of deadly beauty. Then she walked out, not draped in glitter or drowning in diamonds, but wrapped in quiet strength that radiated from her very soul. Briana Douglas, a black woman standing alone on the runway, shattering every unspoken rule they'd carved in stone over decades of exclusion. The crowd of 800 froze as one. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to painted lips. Then came the laughter, sharp as broken glass, cruel as winter wind cutting through summer dreams. Phones shot up like weapons drawn for battle. Fingers pointed like loaded accusations. Eyes rolled like dice thrown by fate itself. Who the hell let her walk out there? Someone sneered from the VIP section, voice dripping with disbelief. This has to be some kind of mistake, another whispered, the words carrying through the sudden silence like poison in still water. But Briana kept moving forward. Each step was thunder rolling across sacred ground. Each stride screamed without words. I own this space. I own this moment. I own myself. They thought she was lost, confused, a cruel joke walking in expensive clothes she had no right to wear. What they didn't know was about to burn their perfect world down to ash. The runway stretched 40 feet long, sparkling like scattered diamonds under white-hot lights that could melt skin and expose souls. Fashion Week in Miami, the second most important fashion event in America. Only perfection was allowed to dance through this holy ground, where dreams were made and destroyed in 15-minute intervals. The audience sat in perfect rows like soldiers at attention. They sipped champagne that cost more than most people's rent and traded secrets worth more than small countries. Designers whose names were whispered like prayers. Movie stars whose faces sold magazines. Internet kings and queens whose single posts could make or break careers. All of them hunting for beauty that looked exactly like them. Tall, thin, pale, and empty enough to be filled with their fantasies. Then she appeared from the shadows. No fanfare. No introduction. No spotlight announcing her arrival like a queen deserving recognition. She wasn't stick-thin like the walking skeletons who'd paraded before her. Her shoes had walked real streets and seen real miles. The gown she wore blazed with inner fire, but all wrong. Too loud, too real, too unapologetically black. Shock waves rolled through the audience like an earthquake measuring 8.0 on the scale of their comfortable prejudices. In row 3, fashion blogger Jessica Mitchell, blonde hair perfect, teeth veneered white, soul painted beige, squinted and raised her phone like a weapon. What kind of publicity stunt is this supposed to be? She muttered to her assistant, already calculating the clicks this disaster would bring. From the VIP section, celebrity stylist Connor Walsh, skinny as a runway model, twice as empty, threw his head back and laughed loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Looks like somebody's coffee girl wandered out here thinking she's Naomi Campbell. The mockery started quiet. Nervous giggles from the fashion students in the back, confused whispers from the magazine editors in the middle. Then it exploded into something ugly and alive, feeding on itself like fire consuming oxygen. Who gave the cleaning lady a designer dress? She looks like she stole that from the costume closet. This is supposed to be high fashion, not some diversity charity case. Someone calls security before she trips and ruins the real model's moment. The laughter cut through the air like razors slicing silk. They thought they had permission to be cruel. They believed they were watching a disaster unfold in real time. And disasters were always entertaining when they happened to other people. But Briana never stopped moving. Head held high like a queen surveying her kingdom. Back straight like a soldier marching into battle. Moving like she owned every inch of that runway, every beam of light, every breath of air in that sacred space. As if she couldn't hear their poison words. As if their collective hate meant less than nothing. As if she knew a secret that would destroy them all when the truth finally came to light. Her walk wasn't the practiced glide of a professional model. It was something else entirely. The purposeful stride of a woman who had fought for every step, who had earned every inch of space she took up in this world. Backstage was pure chaos wrapped in designer panic. Stage manager Rachel Stevens, red hair flying, clipboard forgotten, dropped everything and spun around like a tornado made of anxiety. Who the hell is that woman? How did she get past security? Assistant coordinator Tyler Brooks, pale as fresh snow and twice as cold, stammered like a broken machine. She wasn't on the lineup. I swear she wasn't on any list. Oh God, I think she's wearing dress 23. Get security now, someone screamed from the darkness. She's crashing the entire show. This is a disaster. But the cameras were already rolling, their red lights blinking like electronic eyes that never blinked. The audience was watching, mesmerized despite their mockery. Social media was exploding with clips and commentary. Every eye in that building was locked on her like a target. And still she walked, untouchable as a goddess. Near the runway's end, fashion critic Andrew Hamilton, gray hair perfectly styled, soul perfectly empty, leaned over to his companion and muttered, "Well, she'll be internet famous by midnight. Probably infamous. Hope she enjoyed her 15 minutes of delusion." But just before turning back toward the entrance, Briana paused. Just long enough to meet his eyes directly. Her expression didn't change by even a fraction. No tears threatening to fall. No shame coloring her cheeks. No fear trembling in her stance. Just a look that reached into his chest and squeezed his heart like a fist. A look that said clearer than any words, "You have absolutely no idea who you're messing with, but you're about to learn." Then she spun gracefully on her heel and walked back down the runway. Her dress catching light like it had stories to tell and secrets to whisper to anyone brave enough to listen. They laughed until their sides hurt. They mocked until their voices grew hoarse. They assumed until assumption became their religion. And in doing so, they made the biggest mistake of their privileged lives. Backstage exploded into chaos the exact moment Briana's foot touched the floor behind the curtain. The air crackled with panic and rage so thick you could taste it like copper pennies on your tongue. Choreographer Marcus Chen's expensive headset slipped off his ear as he spun around in a complete circle. Eyes wild with the kind of fear that ends careers. Who the hell authorized this nightmare? Someone's head is going to roll. Hair and makeup artists froze mid-brush, their tools hanging in the air like suspended animation. Assistants stared wide-eyed like deer caught in headlights, some covering their mouths in horror, others pretending to study their phones with the intensity of scholars, terrified they'd be blamed for this catastrophe. She wasn't on the schedule. Someone whispered like they were confessing a sin. She took dress 23. Another muttered like they were announcing a death. The brand representative, Chad Morrison, hair slicked back with enough gel to style a small army, wearing a suit so tight it looked painted on his pale frame, shoved through the chaos like a bulldozer made of designer fabric and misplaced rage. Where's the actual model who was supposed to wear that gown? Someone better have answers. The answer came from a dark corner where shame lived. A young model named Amber, still wrapped in her silk robe, sat hunched over like a broken bird, pale as moonlight and twice as fragile. I fainted backstage. Couldn't breathe. Panic attack. When I woke up, the dress was gone. Just gone. Security stormed in. 3 big men with badges and radios, and the kind of authority that comes from never being questioned. One of them pulled up a photo from a live stream on his phone. The image sharp and undeniable. Her, he grunted, pointing at the screen with a thick finger. That's our runway crasher. That's the woman who just humiliated your entire brand. Chad's voice rose to a hiss that could strip paint. She wasn't approved. She wasn't vetted. She wasn't even supposed to exist in this building. She stole our moment. She ruined everything. The room held its collective breath like a drowning person hoping for rescue. But in the far corner, hidden in shadow like a secret waiting to be told, someone wasn't panicking at all. Briana stood perfectly still, calm as a lake before dawn. A single bead of sweat traced down her temple. Not from fear that paralyzed, but from heat and pure adrenaline that energized. Her hands rested easy at her sides. Her breathing was steady and controlled. Her eyes never flinched, not even when the security guards moved closer, because she knew something no one else in that room of beautiful fools understood. This wasn't a scandal that would destroy careers. This wasn't a disaster that would end in lawsuits and apologies. This was truth fighting its way to light after being buried in darkness for far too long. Outside in the main hall, the crowd buzzed like a hive of angry bees. Some thought it was an elaborate publicity stunt designed to generate buzz. Others laughed it off as just another weird Fashion Week moment that would be forgotten by tomorrow. But inside the inner circle where real power lived and breathed, careers were crashing like planes in a storm. She must be from the catering staff, guessed Patricia Williams, a fashion editor whose opinion could make or break designers. No, I saw her yesterday in the design studio, remembered David Kim, a photographer whose lens had captured 1,000 beautiful lies. She was just there. She doesn't even look like a model, complained Samantha Reed, an influencer whose followers hung on her every word like gospel. Was she someone's guest? Someone's +1 who got confused. Call PR immediately. We need damage control before Vogue writes about this disaster. In the middle of the storm, Assistant Creative Director Emma Rodriguez, young enough to still believe in fairness, stressed enough to have forgotten how to sleep, 2 missed meals away from complete collapse, whispered something that stopped all conversation. She was sketching something yesterday. In the back. I thought she was helping with alterations. Everyone froze like statues in a museum. What did you just say? I thought she was part of the sewing team. She had needles and thread in her hands. She was measuring things. She looked like she belonged in the back, working on the clothes. In that single sentence hung everything they'd built their world on. She looked like she belonged in the back. In the shadows. In the darkness. In the places where real work happened, but credit never came. And now she had walked dead center through their most precious lie. Their most beautiful deception. Their greatest fear wasn't that she had ruined the show with her presence. Their greatest fear was that she had made the show with her absence. Long before the bright lights and runway gossip, before the champagne and cameras and cruel laughter, there was a small apartment in Detroit that most people would call humble and Briana called home. Window cracked open for fresh air even in the depths of winter, because the ancient radiator hissed like an angry snake and filled the room with heat that choked dreams. The table was nothing fancy. A wooden door she'd found on the street, balanced carefully on milk crates painted bright colors to make poverty look like a choice. The sewing machine was her grandmother's legacy. An ancient singer with paint chipped away by decades of use, but with a soul intact and a heart that still beat strong. This was where Briana created. Not for applause that never came. Not for approval she'd never receive. But because her hands refused to be still. because her mind saw beauty in scraps others threw away, because she understood that creation was prayer and prayer was survival. They didn't know about the countless nights she bled into her work. Literally bled. Needle pricks that painted her fingerprints red. Blisters that formed and broke and formed again. Thread that tangled in her braids as she nodded off at 3 in the morning, still hunched over a hem that had to be perfect. Rent overdue by weeks. Groceries rationed like wartime supplies. Heat turned off more often than on. And yet every single sketch she drew was a declaration written in faith and hope. You will see me. You will know my name. You will remember what I created when you've forgotten everyone else. They didn't know she had walked into 15 different fashion houses over 2 years, her portfolio pressed against her chest like armor, like hope, like a prayer book filled with visions they couldn't understand, only to be told again and again that her designs were too bold for their customers, too urban for their brand. Not quite what we're looking for right now. But maybe they'd keep her information on file. Translation: not white enough. Not safe enough. Not wealthy enough. Not from the right neighborhood, the right family, the right world. They didn't know how many times she'd been told to stay in the background where she belonged, to assist the real designers, to support the real talent, to sew someone else's vision into reality while her own dreams gathered dust. But she refused to disappear. When they slammed the front door in her face, she found a window and climbed through it. She submitted her designs under a pseudonym, B. Delacroix, a name no one could place, with no face attached, no race to judge, no assumptions to make. That's exactly how it happened. A buzz built around the mysterious designs like wildfire in dry grass. Fashion editors who'd never given her a second glance suddenly loved the daring cuts, the bold structures, the unapologetic blackness woven into pure elegance. A major label bit the hook hard. They bought her entire collection and offered her a deal. Work in-house. No public credit yet, but exposure, experience, a foot in the door that had been slammed in her face so many times. She took it without hesitation. Not because she wanted to hide in someone else's shadow, but because she understood something they didn't. The real battle wasn't getting a seat at their table. It was proving that the table needed her more than she needed them. They had no idea she had personally hand-stitched every thread of the gown she wore that night. Dress 23. Her masterpiece. Her declaration of war wrapped in silk and dreams. Inspired by her grandmother's church robes. The ones that held prayers and tears and Sunday morning hope, and by images of African queens she'd studied in library books when she couldn't afford to buy them herself. Power wrapped in grace, strength disguised as beauty, revolution dressed up as fashion. Every single pleat told a story that began with slavery and ended with freedom. Every seam was intentional, placed with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. She didn't wear it for attention from people who'd never truly see her. She didn't wear it for approval from judges who'd already made up their minds. She wore it because when the scheduled model fainted and chaos erupted backstage, when panic filled the air like smoke from a fire, no one, not one single person, stepped up to save her work from being wasted. So she saved it herself. They had no clue that when they laughed at her, pointed their manicured fingers at her, rolled their eyes at her audacity, they were mocking the very soul of the show they'd paid hundreds of dollars to attend. The dress they dismissed as too much and inappropriate was the centerpiece of the entire marketing campaign. The woman they called a joke, a mistake, an accident, was the one who had created it all. In silence that screamed, in shadows that blazed with light. In a small apartment in Detroit with nothing but raw talent and unbreakable will, and a sewing machine that remembered when America was a different country. They didn't know any of this, but they were about to find out, and the revelation would shake their world until it cracked. The fashion show had been carefully planned like a military operation. Every model, Every dress, every step choreographed to perfection. The collection was supposed to close with dress 23. The crown jewel that fashion magazines had been whispering about for weeks, the piece that would be photographed 1,000 times and remembered for years. But exactly 10 minutes before the finale, disaster struck like lightning from a clear sky. The scheduled model, Amber Sinclair, 19 years old, 90 pounds, existing on cigarettes and anxiety, collapsed in the dressing area. Dehydrated from days of preparation. Nerves shot from the pressure. Her knees buckled like paper in rain. And she hit the floor with a sound that stopped every conversation. Medics rushed in with equipment and questions. Paramedics checked her pulse and blood pressure. Everything stopped moving, except for the clock that kept ticking toward showtime. The entire team panicked like passengers on a sinking ship. The whole sequence, the entire flow of the show, had been built around that closing walk. Without dress 23, without that final moment of perfection, the show would fall flat. End with a whimper instead of the bang that sold magazines and launched careers. Sponsors worth millions of dollars sat in the audience. Press representatives from every major publication. Influencers whose opinions could make or break a designer's future. All waiting for that one unforgettable moment that would be shared and reshared until it became fashion legend. No one knew what to do. No one had a plan for this kind of disaster. No one except Briana. She had been standing in the corner like furniture, holding a sewing kit in one hand and her resolve in the other. No official title. No crew of assistants. No recognition of any kind. Just deep, unshakable knowledge that this collection, her collection, born from her mind and shaped by her hands, deserved to be seen completely, perfectly, powerfully. Head stylist Connor Walsh threw his hands up in defeat and shouted over the noise. "We'll have to skip the look. Close with dress 22 and hope nobody notices." But Briana stepped forward from the shadows where she'd been invisible. "I'll walk it." The entire room turned to stare at her like she'd announced she could fly. Confusion painted every face. Amusement sparkled in several pairs of eyes. Scorn dripped from perfectly glossed lips. "You!" Assistant stylist Kelly Barnes actually laughed out loud, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Honey, this is haute couture, not amateur night at the local community center." But Briana didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't explain. She simply slipped the dress over her shoulders with the natural ease of someone who'd worn it 100 times in her imagination. Because she had worn it. In her mind. In her dreams. In the mirror of her tiny bathroom at 3 in the morning, when she finally finished the last perfect stitch. She had draped it on her own body, cut it to fit her own curves, stitched it with her own bleeding fingers. She had sculpted it during endless nights when the mannequins at the design house didn't match her shape. So she became her own model, her own muse, her own inspiration. And when she stepped into those blinding lights, when she walked toward that runway like she was walking toward her destiny, no one in that building had the power to stop her. Because she wasn't just wearing a dress. She was wearing her own revolution. The transition from backstage chaos to runway calm happened in the space of a single breath. Backstage shouts and panic turned to stunned silence as she passed through the curtain like a queen entering her throne room. The audience, completely unaware of the emergency and confusion behind the scenes, saw only a new figure emerging from the shadows. Regal as an African queen, radiant as a star being born, real as pain and joy and every emotion that made life worth living. Her walk wasn't the practiced, empty glide of a professional runway model who'd been trained to be a beautiful hanger for other people's dreams. It didn't need to be. What she carried down the runway wasn't just fabric and thread and designer dreams. It was the accumulated weight of being deliberately invisible. The sharp pain of years of rejection that cut like knives. The bitter taste of months spent being called just the help. by people who couldn't create beauty if their lives depended on it. The burning sting of knowing that an entire industry loved her work, worshipped her vision, profited from her talent, but would never love her face, never worship her truth, never let her profit from her own genius. And still she walked. The cameras clicked not from pity or charity or obligation, but because something about her presence was genuinely magnetic. She moved like someone who had absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone, and everything left to claim for herself. She saved the show that night, not with theatrical drama or manufactured spectacle, but with something far more powerful, authentic presence. She filled that 40-foot runway not just with beauty that pleased the eye, but with truth that reached the soul. And for one brief, shining moment that seemed to last forever, no one in that building could deny what they were witnessing. Backstage, jaws dropped like stones into deep water. Brand representative Chad Morrison, who had called her a disaster and a mistake just minutes before, stood frozen as he watched the audience rise to their feet as one, applauding with genuine enthusiasm for the first time all evening. Celebrity stylist Connor Walsh, who had wanted to skip the dress entirely and pretend it didn't exist, stared with his mouth hanging open like a door without hinges. She walked off that runway exactly the same way she had walked onto it. Proud as a lioness, composed as a classical symphony, unforgettable as first love. And for the first time since she'd appeared, the whispers weren't mocking or cruel or dismissive. They were curious, hungry, desperate. Who is she? What's her name? Where did she come from? The beautiful irony that would haunt them all. She'd been right there among them all along, invisible in plain sight. In the age of social media, nothing stays secret for longer than it takes to upload a video. By the time Briana's feet touched the backstage floor again, a blurry but unmistakable clip of her entire runway walk had already been uploaded to TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and every other platform where dreams go to become viral sensations or die forgotten deaths. The original caption was simple and cutting. "Who is this mystery woman crashing the finale?" The comment section exploded like a social media bomb. "She looks completely lost, lol. This has to be some kind of joke. The confidence though. I mean, respect. Is this performance art or just chaos?" Security was sleeping tonight. But then something shifted in the digital conversation. Someone with sharper eyes and better intentions posted a close-up screenshot. Not of Briana's face, of the dress itself. The camera had accidentally captured the intricate embroidery stitched along the hem in threads so fine it was almost invisible. Elegant as ancient poetry. Intentional as prayer. Beautiful as sunrise. And there, woven into the fabric in silver threads so delicate it looked like whispered secrets. B. Delacroix. One comment changed the entire narrative. "Wait, hold up. That's the designer's signature. She designed that dress." Digital silence rippled through the thread like a wave of realization. Phones buzzed in the front row of the fashion show like electronic heartbeats. Fashion editors leaned into each other, whispering urgently. Influencers started Googling frantically. A sharp-eyed producer backstage flipped open her laptop with hands that trembled slightly. The brand's official website had just posted the complete collection credits in small print that most people never bothered to read. At the very bottom, in type so tiny it seemed designed to be overlooked. Creative design direction, Briana Douglas, professionally known as B. Delacroix. Not a ghost haunting the fashion world. Not a myth whispered in design studios. Not some mysterious white man in an expensive suit taking credit for work he'd never touched. Her, the black woman they had laughed at until their sides hurt. The mystery crasher. They had called a mistake, a joke, an accident. The woman who had just saved their entire show from becoming a forgettable disaster. Now they knew exactly who she was. And everything changed in that moment of recognition. PR manager Sarah Chin nearly dropped her phone as the realization hit her like a truck filled with consequences. Her fingers fumbled with her headset as she tried to process what this meant for everyone involved. "Oh my God," she whispered, then louder. My God, she's B. Delacroix. She's the actual designer. Get her back out here immediately. We need photos. We need interviews. We need damage control before this becomes a complete catastrophe." But Briana was already walking back out into the main hall. This time not wearing someone else's creation, but clothed in her own unshakable dignity. She stood calmly at the edge of the media area, eyes steady as mountain peaks, hands relaxed at her sides. No tears threatening to fall. No apology trembling on her lips. No shame anywhere in her posture. Reporters and photographers surged forward like hungry wolves, all wanting to be first with the story that would define Fashion Week. Are you really the designer behind this entire collection? Why weren't you properly credited in the program? Why did you walk the runway instead of letting the scheduled model wear your creation? How long have you been designing under a pseudonym? What's your response to the people who laughed at you? She took the microphone with the same quiet grace she'd shown on the runway. Calm as a lake, steady as a mountain, powerful as a storm gathering strength. And when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the sudden silence. "I walked tonight because no one else would. I walked because this moment was about the work. Not about politics or prejudice, or who fits someone else's narrow definition of what belongs on a runway. I didn't need anyone's permission to wear my own creation, to present my own vision, to claim my own space." The room fell so quiet you could hear hearts beating and consciences breaking. Celebrity stylist Connor Walsh's face turned bright red with shame. Fashion influencer Jessica Mitchell stared at her phone screen, avoiding all eye contact like it was contagious. Fashion critic Andrew Hamilton slowly zipped up his designer jacket, wishing he could disappear entirely. Everyone in that room now understood with crystal clarity that she wasn't an accident or a mistake or a random disruption. She was the architect of everything they'd been celebrating. She was the mind that conceived it, the hands that created it, the vision that brought it all into existence. All their mocking, all their laughter, all their assumptions, it wasn't just tasteless or cruel anymore. It was embarrassing. It was public. It was permanent. And it was about to follow them for the rest of their careers. The headlines across fashion websites and social media platforms flipped and changed in real time like a slot machine paying out karma. The mystery woman who stole the runway. Plot twist. She owns it. Briana Douglas, the brilliant designer they tried to erase. They laughed at her walk. Now they're scrambling for apologies. Fashion Week's biggest scandal. The truth behind the runway crasher. But Briana didn't wait around for validation that she'd never needed. She turned toward the exit, gave the cameras one last slight nod, gracious as a queen acknowledging her subjects, and walked away into the Miami night. And suddenly, no one dared to laugh anymore. They could only watch her leave and wonder how they'd gotten everything so wrong. The same crowd that had roared with cruel laughter just an hour before now sat in their designer chairs like statues, stiff and uncomfortable and silent. Mouths dry as desert sand, fingers nervously scrolling through their phones, deleting posts and comments, avoiding eye contact with each other like shame was contagious. Briana Douglas, the woman they had mocked, doubted, dismissed, and tried to humiliate, had just been revealed as the visionary behind the most talked about, most photographed, most celebrated collection of the entire fashion season. And no one in that building knew what to say about it. The silence that followed was louder than any applause, more powerful than any standing ovation, more damning than any accusation. It was the sound of an industry realizing that all their beautiful clothes couldn't cover the ugliness of their assumptions. When the sun rose over Miami the next morning, the fashion world was in complete chaos. Everyone was scrambling to understand how they had missed something so obvious. How they had mocked and dismissed the very woman who had quietly shattered every expectation, challenged every assumption, and proved that genius doesn't always come in the package they expected. Briana Douglas had become more than just a name trending on social media. She had transformed into a symbol, a living reminder of everything that had been overlooked, dismissed, undervalued, and ignored by an industry that prided itself on vision, but had been blind to the brilliance right in front of them. And now, in a panic of guilt and fear and desperate damage control, the same institutions that had tried to erase her from the story were frantically scrambling to claim her as their own discovery. The first attempt at an apology came in the form of a carefully crafted Instagram post from the fashion house. All corporate polish and calculated emotion. White background, sans serif font. A perfectly filtered photo of Briana in her gown, looking regal and untouchable. The caption read, "We recognize that we failed to properly credit the extraordinary talent of Briana Douglas. Her vision and creativity deserve the recognition they have always merited. We commit to doing better. Hashtag respect the artist, hashtag fashion justice." No mention of the executives who had made the decision to hide her identity. No face-to-face conversation or personal accountability. Just a single social media post thrown into the digital void like a corporate life preserver. The public response was swift and merciless. "This apology is about 6 months too late, don't you think? Let's see some actual change, not just hashtag activism. You can't erase months of erasure with a single Instagram post. Show us the money. Is she getting retroactive credit and compensation? This feels like damage control, not genuine remorse." The half-hearted apology satisfied no one and convinced everyone that the fashion world's problems ran much deeper than a single oversight. But the real revolution was just beginning. Exactly 1 week after the runway moment that changed everything, Briana Douglas stood at the head of her own press conference in a downtown Miami hotel conference room. The space was packed beyond capacity. Fashion editors who had ignored her for years. Designers who had dismissed her vision. Photographers who had never bothered to learn her name. Influencers who had built careers on the work of people they'd never credited. And yes, many of the same people who had laughed at her on that runway just 7 days before. But they weren't laughing now. They were waiting, watching, hoping to catch whatever magic she might be willing to share. She wore a sharp, perfectly tailored business suit in deep navy blue. No frills, no unnecessary drama, no look-at-me desperation. Just power tailored into every seam, confidence stitched into every line. Her natural hair was styled in a way that honored her heritage while claiming her space. Her hands were steady on the podium like they belonged there. For the first time in her career, there was no need for performance. No forced smiles or diplomatic answers. No playing along with games that were rigged against her from the start. In that room, surrounded by the people who had tried to make her invisible, there were finally no questions left about who she was or what she deserved. The questions came rapidly, but they were different now. Respectful, curious, hungry for the wisdom she'd gained through years of struggle. What's next for your design career? Will you be starting your own fashion house? What advice do you have for other designers who feel overlooked? How do you want to change the fashion industry? Her response was measured, thoughtful, and absolutely certain. "I never needed their approval to create," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I don't exist for anyone else's validation. I'm here because I've always known exactly who I am and what I'm capable of creating. And what happened last week? That wasn't the end of my story. That was just the beginning of my industry." And with those words, the floodgates opened completely. Fashion journalists who had once questioned her background now begged for exclusive interviews about her creative process. Magazine editors who had ignored her portfolios now offered her cover stories and features. Photographers who had never seen her as worth capturing now competed for the chance to document her journey. No more mockery. No more assumptions. No more treating her like she was lucky to be included. Just the respect she had always deserved and the recognition she had already earned. The revolution was complete, and Briana Douglas was ready to rule. Sometimes the most powerful revolution happens when someone simply refuses to be invisible. Sometimes changing an entire industry starts with one person brave enough to walk into the light. Asterisk, and sometimes the best response to laughter is success, so loud it drowns out every cruel sound that came before.